let's get started. You guys can follow along. We are in chapter 3, section 1. So it actually starts in your books on page 81, 82-ish is where we are. So you guys can follow along. Make sure that you take notes in your PowerPoint because, again, this PowerPoint is a little skimpy. So you need to make sure that you're taking notes as we do lecture. And again, I would reiterate that, before we take the test, you go back and read through everything that we've discussed. I think that will make you guys a lot more successful. I think it will make a lot of sense after we've talked about it and I've explained some things. That's a great way to study. And I think the people who did that were very pleased with their grades. Or their test grade. So let's get going. Okay, integumentary system. Everybody say integumentary. Integumentary. Say it one more time. Integumentary. I know a lot of people have trouble saying this one. So anyways, so the integumentary system is really your skin, and then it can include the membranes within our body too. And so we're going to talk about the different types of membranes that we find in our body, and then we'll talk about our skin as a whole, because your skin is actually an organ. And I'm not just talking about the skin that you see. I mean, there's, the portion underneath also that you don't see. It includes glands, sweat glands, touch receptors, and so forth. Okay, but first let's talk about body membranes. We'll actually talk about the skin tomorrow in class. So we have two basic types of membranes. We have epithelial membranes and connective tissue membranes. And if you'll remember from the last chapter, epithelial tissue typically lines, covers, and so forth. Our connective tissue serves to connect things together or keep them in place and so forth. So generally speaking, that's what we see. Now the membranes as a whole are a little bit different. Okay, one major difference in the two of these is that your epithelial membranes have both epithelial tissue and connective tissue. Okay, so again, we're talking about membranes here. We're not just talking about tissue like we did last chapter. This is specifically about membranes. So epithelial membranes contain both epithelial tissue and connective tissue. Okay, connective tissue membranes contain only connective tissue. Okay, so write that down. You need to know that epithelial membranes are both epithelial and connective tissue. They contain both, and we'll talk about how that is in a minute. And then connective tissue membranes are just connective tissue. Okay, so there's three types of epithelial membranes. And you guys can actually follow along on 83, again, is where we are. Okay, so you have three types of epithelial membranes. And basically all of your epithelial membranes have like the epithelial layer of tissue on top, kind of like we talked about with, your epithelial tissues, if you'll remember. That's like your simple squamous, simple cuboidal, simple columnar, stratified squamous, stratified columnar, stratified cuboidal, pseudostratified, transitional. All of those are your epithelial tissues. Now, if you'll remember, there's a basement membrane at the bottom of all of those because they have to grow up from somewhere. Well, under that basement membrane, we always find connective tissue. So when you think of these epithelial membranes, that's kind of your lining, your covering, and so forth. So it has epithelial tissue on top, connective tissue on bottom. Okay, so mucous membranes. Okay, these are what they sound like they are. Okay, they secrete mucus. So we typically find these in our hollow organs that are open to the environment. Okay, so that means they have a tube somewhere that goes out of the body. Okay, so think through. We have our respiratory tract, right? Our nose, our throat, our lungs, all of that has an opening to the outside of the body. Our urinary tract, right? We have our urethra opens to the outside of the body and then goes into the bladder. So the bladder is one example of an area that would have an epithelial membrane. You know, we talked about, remember, transitional epithelial tissue is found there. Our reproductive tracts are open to the outside environment. So those are lined with mucous membranes. And then our digestive tract, of course, goes all the way through our body. So both the mouth and the rectum are covered in mucous membranes. Now, we find structure-wise, when we talk about mucous membranes, the epithelial tissue is located or stands right above a loose connective tissue. So mucous membranes, we have epithelial tissue and then loose connective tissue underneath. This is called the lamina propria, and if you're having trouble spelling it, it's on page 82 at the bottom. So mucous membranes, we have epithelial tissue on top, and then underneath we have loose connective tissue called the lamina propria. Okay. All of these membranes are what we consider a moist membrane. Another area is around our eye, like inside of your eyelids, that's a mucous membrane. Anyway. And so all of these we find are moist with mucus. They secrete mucus, and that helps to protect and then transport. Like, for example, the mucus in, like in your trachea helps transport dust and debris and allergens out of your respiratory system. Other than that, very important in protection. We talked about, I think we did anyways, we haven't, we will, your stomach secretes hydrochloric acid to help break down foods. Well, that acid would actually eat your stomach if you didn't also have cells that produce mucus, goblet cells, what they're called. Anyways, they produce mucus that actually protects the inside of your stomach from the acid. Okay, the next type of epithelial membrane are called serous membranes, and these line the cavities that are not open to the environment. So again, it lines cavities, it lines organs, but these are ones that are not open to the outside. So examples of these include what's called the pleura, P-L-E-U-R-A, the pleura. Okay, we also have my mind just went to parietal, but we'll get there in a second. Pericardial, the pericardial sac. Peri means around, and cardia is heart. So the pericardial sac is the lining around the outside of the heart. And then we have the peritoneal cavity. That's the abdominal cavity, and it has a lining in it as well. So those are three examples of serous membranes. The structure of these is they all have a double layer, okay? All serous membranes have a double layer. They have an outer layer, it's called the parietal layer, or the parietal membrane, if you will. And then the inner layer is called the visceral, V-I-S-C-E-R-A-L, visceral. So parietal is the outer layer, visceral is the inner layer. And we'll repeat these, we'll learn these again when we get to the heart and lungs and so forth, but you need to know them now. So structure-wise, when we talk about these membranes, they are a double layer. We typically see their outer layer is a simple squamous epithelial tissue, simple squamous. And then they'll be on a really thin layer of loose connective tissue. So their outer layer of simple squamous on a loose connective tissue. That's what we see structure-wise. Okay, all of these, the tissues within these membranes secrete a serous fluid. Makes sense. Serous membranes secrete serous fluid. Mucous membranes secrete mucus. Okay, serous fluid is a little bit more watery than mucus. It's really thin and clear liquid. You see it a lot. People have like they have a lung that's collapsed or something. That fluid, that membrane will actually fill up with fluid. But this actually works to lubricate. Though typically you see these in areas where they need to be able to move, like your heart. Okay, it fills up with blood and it pumps and gets smaller, larger, smaller, larger, smaller. Well, the heart moves. Well, what that serous layers do is they actually make it so that the heart can move in and out with its contracting, but not actually rub against anything. It kind of provides this like a barrier almost of just to help with friction and to decrease wear on those muscles and so forth. So that's why it's really important. Same thing with the lungs. Your lungs have to be able to open up, breathe in and breathe out. And so that lining allows the lungs that movement without irritating them. Okay, the last of these membranes is the cutaneous membranes. And cutaneous means skin. Okay, so cutaneous membranes are our skin. Okay, so that's really our integumentary. Well, actually, no, our integumentary system is more than just our skin, but the cutaneous membrane itself is the skin. And we already know it's made of epithelial tissue. We know it's got stratified squamous epithelial tissue. And then underneath, we see that a really dense connective tissue. If you remember, it's irregular, dense connective tissue that we see underneath the skin as the dermis. So irregular, dense connective tissue. Now, the cutaneous membrane is not a wet membrane like serous and mucus. This is a dry membrane. Now, I know sometimes it gets wet because we sweat, but generally it's dry. Actually, and I didn't say this, but your mucous membranes, that's one of the things, if you're ever dehydrated, that's one of the ways that they can tell if you're truly dehydrated is if your mucous membranes are too dry, like your mouth is really dry or your lips are dry or underneath your eyelids and so forth. And I'm sorry, my pictures wouldn't work on this thing, but you'll have to look. And actually, if you will, go look real quick at 83, page 83, and you can see your mucous membranes and serous membranes there. Okay, again, all the serous membranes are a double layer, and that becomes really important when we start looking at how the lungs actually work and how the heart works and so forth. Okay, the connective tissue membranes, there's really only one type of membrane that is completely and only connective tissue, and that's what's called the synovial membrane. And I think we've talked about this term before, but this is a capsule around your joints, like your knee and your shoulder, both are synovial joints. And there's a picture, if you'll flip over to page 84 in your textbook, it kind of shows you a picture of this. Now, the way that this, I don't want you to get confused. This picture is kind of weird, but anyway, this picture, they've kind of pulled, the patella is your kneecap, so they've kind of pulled it away when you're looking at this picture. But anyway, so the synovial membrane is just like a capsule that surrounds a joint. And inside this capsule, we find fluid, okay? It's called synovial fluid. And that synovial fluid is secreted by the membrane, by the cells in this membrane, by these connective tissues. And then that helps to really cushion the joint. So that, our joints get a lot of wear and tear and stress. And so they really need some serious protection because, they're moved, we think lots of stress, lots of compression, lots of stretching, and so forth. So they help to really decrease friction within the bones because they move all the time. And then also it decreases wear on the bones. The less synovial fluid, the more our bones are going to kind of crunch together and cause that osteoarthritis and things of that nature. The tendon sheath, we also find this synovial membrane, it kind of wraps around the tendons. And the same thing, it also includes what's called the bursa, B-U-R-S-A. And bursa is like that capsule that actually cushions itself. You can, I think it's, well, it doesn't talk about it in here, but anyway. Says the bursa are small connective tissue sacs that serve as cushions for tendons and ligaments surrounding the joints. So these are kind of smaller sacs. And a lot of times people will get bursitis, and you'll see it like around their elbow or their knee or somewhere, and they just like swell up and kind of look like a little balloon or a bubble. Really, really painful, they say. But anyway, Some people say it's not painful, but whatever. And then, so all of this just works to really cushion the joint and protect it, keep it from, just keep that friction out of the way and so forth. Let's do a quick review. It says match these words below. So synovial, I'll let you guys pause for a second and answer these, and then we'll go over them. Okay, it says the ones that line cavities open to the environment. Okay, we know that's the mucous membranes. Okay, if you get confused in the test, think about, okay, my mouth, is it a wet or dry membrane? Well, we know it's obviously our mouth is a wet membrane. Nose, same way. So nose secretes mucus. Go from there. Line cavities not open, that's your serous membranes. Tendon sheath, that's your synovial. And then the skin is cutaneous. Cutaneous always means skin, so whenever you see that word. Okay, good. And that's it for today.